She mocked him in front of 200 executives. A black janitor fixing this $2 million engine? Impossible. Every top engineer had failed, and millions were on the line. But Jamal Washington, overlooked and underestimated, did the unthinkable in just 2 hours. He exposed her arrogance, stunned the world, and proved that talent sees no title or color. The morning sun reflected off the glass towers of Silicon Valley, casting long shadows over Tech Vanguard Industries' 40-story headquarters. Inside, the executive boardroom gleamed with marble floors, polished oak tables, and leather chairs that whispered power and privilege. For most, it was a room of opportunity and success. For Jamal Washington, it was a place he had walked past thousands of times without a second thought. Until today, Jamal, a 28-year-old black man with calloused hands and a heart full of unrecognized brilliance, pushed a trash cart down the hallway. He had spent 3 years moving unnoticed through these corridors, cleaning floors, emptying bins, and silently observing the chaos of a company that called itself a leader in autonomous vehicle technology. Officially, his title read technical consultant, but everyone knew the truth. Jamal was a janitor, a brilliant engineer in disguise, trapped by circumstance and responsibility. Today, however, was different. Today, Victoria Sterling, the company's CEO, had decided to make a spectacle. At 38, Victoria had built Tech Vanguard from the ground up, a woman of beauty, intellect, and terrifying ambition. Her sharp suits, perfectly coiffed hair, and red Louis Vuitton heels were symbols of her unyielding power. But today, she wanted to humiliate, and Jamal would be the target. A janitor? She sneered, her voice cutting through the murmurs of 200 executives seated in the boardroom. You think you can fix this $2 million engine? MIT engineers failed. Ivy League graduates couldn't make it run. And you expect, what? That your mop and broom will solve our $50 million problem. The room erupted in polite, stifled laughter. Jamal froze, gripping the handle of his cart, the smell of cleaning supplies clashing with the metallic tang of the sparking engine before him. Every head turned. The top minds in engineering, Harvard, MIT, Stanford graduates, sat in disbelief that anyone could be so audaciously underestimated. Victoria stepped closer, her expensive perfume blending with contempt. "Here's a deal," she said, her voice dripping venom. "Fix this engine in front of everyone. 2 hours. If you succeed, maybe I'll acknowledge your existence. Fail, and security will escort you out permanently. And don't think your title or degrees matter here. You are invisible." "That's all you are," Jamal's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of years pressing on him. Community college had been his path, one chosen not for convenience, but necessity. His mother's cancer treatments had left no room for expensive universities. Night shifts, early mornings, and weekends spent working low-paying jobs had become his reality. But his mind had never stopped learning. Engineering journals, late-night online courses, salvaged engine parts. Every spare moment had been spent sharpening the skills no one expected him to possess. He glanced around the room. Investors in black Mercedes sedans waited outside. German engineers had flown in specifically to evaluate Tech Vanguard's technology. Their expressions were unreadable, but their eyes were sharp, assessing the company's competence and leadership. Jamal could feel their skepticism, and yet, deep down, he knew they would see what Victoria Sterling refused to acknowledge. Talent doesn't bow to titles. Talent doesn't care about prejudice. Talent listens. And he had been listening for years. Victoria raised her hand dramatically. 2 hours, or you're finished. Show us why we should even tolerate your presence. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to the humming engine, the polished floor, and the eyes of every powerful figure in the room. Jamal inhaled, steadying himself. This was not just a test of skill. It was a test of dignity, of perseverance, of the years of silent work that no one had ever noticed. As Victoria stepped back, smirking at her supposed victory, Jamal whispered to himself, barely audible over the murmurs, "Engines don't care who you are. They only care who listens." And with that, the janitor, overlooked and underestimated, prepared to confront a challenge that would change everything. The boardroom held its breath. The murmur of whispers faded into a tense silence. Every executive, every investor, every engineer 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on Jamal Washington. Victoria Sterling's smirk remained, but there was a subtle flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. She had expected humiliation, spectacle, and confirmation of her superiority. What she didn't anticipate was resolve. Jamal stepped forward, his uniform crisp, hands steady, eyes calm. He approached the engine as if greeting an old friend. To the untrained eye, it was a complex, impossible machine, metallic labyrinths, blinking sensors, wires snaking in every direction. To Jamal, it was a language, and he had spent years learning to listen. He knelt beside the engine, adjusting his grip to inspect a series of interconnected pistons. The room smelled of burnt metal, overheating oil, and the faint hum of AI-controlled machinery struggling to synchronize with the hardware. Ivy League engineers had tested every conventional method. They had run simulations, recalibrated software, replaced components, and yet nothing worked. Jamal had one advantage: patience, and the patience that comes from listening, observing, and learning when no one is watching. Victoria's voice cut through the silence, sharp and condescending. "Remember, Janitor," she said, her red heels clicking against the floor as she approached. 2 hours. Not a second longer. And everyone is watching. Don't embarrass yourself. Or me? Jamal didn't flinch. He had been humiliated countless times, overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. This wasn't new. What was new was the presence of an opportunity to prove everything. He began by carefully analyzing the harmonic patterns of the engine, his fingers tracing the vibrations, listening to the subtle rhythms of pistons firing, valves opening, and AI adjustments clashing against mechanical tolerances. The Ivy League engineers leaned forward, their faces a mix of incredulity and skepticism. "He's just a janitor," muttered one under his breath. He can't possibly understand harmonic resonance at this level, but Jamal ignored them. He had learned that real engineering isn't about degrees. It's about observation, intuition, and solving problems no one else sees. Every vibration, every subtle frequency mismatch told a story. The engine wasn't broken, it was misunderstood. The software and the hardware were speaking two different languages, one calibrated in imperial units, the other crafted with German precision in metric. The two systems were arguing, and no one had paused to mediate. Minutes passed like hours. Sweat beaded on Victoria's forehead, unnoticed amidst the chaos of investors whispering to one another in German and engineers taking frantic notes. Jamal's movements were deliberate. He pulled out his own calipers, measuring tolerances, cross-referencing with technical manuals, and noting discrepancies that seemed insignificant to everyone else. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the Tesla veteran and technical advisor, stepped closer. She had been silent, watching the unfolding scene. Her trained eyes recognized the precision, the methodology, the unorthodox brilliance in Jamal's work. Every subtle measurement he made was correct, every adjustment calculated. For the first time, the room began to feel a shift. The tension, once entirely one-sided, started to tilt. Perhaps the janitor wasn't just a novelty. Perhaps the janitor had the answer. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "Explain what you're doing," she demanded, masking her rising concern with theatrics. Jamal looked up, calm and measured. "The AI calibration is perfect," he said. "The engine is perfect. They just aren't communicating properly. Imperial versus metric, harmonic mismatches, and slight tolerances causing cascading errors. Nothing the engineers tried addresses the root cause." A murmur of astonishment rippled across the room. Marcus Brooks, MIT-trained lead engineer, blinked, his carefully cultivated confidence shaking. How could someone so unqualified see what his team had missed? Jamal continued undeterred. He moved to the diagnostic console, tracing signals, watching harmonic spikes, noting timing differences between cylinder operations, and carefully explaining, "At 2800 RPM, the AI is forcing mechanical adjustments that the hardware cannot comply with. The pistons fight against sensors. The valves respond, but the engine loses harmony at 14 minutes and 37 seconds. It shuts down, not because it's broken, but because it's misunderstood." Dr. Rodriguez leaned in, her pen poised. She whispered to an assistant, "I've never seen anyone analyze harmonics with such intuition, let alone someone in a cleaning uniform." Victoria's face tightened. Humiliation had turned into disbelief. The room was no longer filled with derision. It was filled with anticipation. Everyone wanted to see whether this invisible janitor could actually succeed. Jamal took a deep breath, centered himself, and prepared to bridge the divide between metal and software. The real test, the moment when decades of hidden knowledge and perseverance would collide with arrogance, was about to begin. Jamal's hands hovered over the engine, calm yet deliberate. Every movement was calculated, the result of years of instinct homed in late-night garages, community college labs, and solitary nights studying automotive engineering journals. The hum of the AI-driven engine filled the room like a beast awakening, but it wasn't harmony. It was a mechanical argument. The pistons were firing, the valves were moving, but the rhythm was wrong. Victoria Sterling's heels clicked nervously against the floor. She had expected laughter, disaster, humiliation. Instead, she saw precision and confidence radiating from the janitor she had scorned for years. Her red Louis Vuitton heels seemed heavier now, weighed down by the tension in the room. Investors leaned forward, intrigued. Engineers exchanged uneasy glances. The whispers had vanished. Every eye followed Jamal, as if the solution itself resided in his hands. Jamal pulled a caliper from his tool bag and began measuring key components, pistons, rods, and connecting chains. His eyes darted between the hardware and the diagnostic screens, mentally converting tolerances, comparing German engineering standards to American software programming assumptions. The discrepancy was subtle, a fraction of a millimeter, but in a high-performance AI-integrated engine, that small margin was catastrophic. "The software is perfect," Jamal said aloud, voice carrying over the tense boardroom. "The engine is perfect. The problem isn't failure, it's miscommunication." The words rippled through the room. Marcus Brooks, lead engineer from MIT, leaned closer to his laptop. He frowned, rechecking the data. The numbers matched Jamal's observations. His jaw tightened. Could it really be this simple? Could the $2 million 6-week failing engine come down to a matter of harmonic resonance and tolerance mismatches? Jamal's next step was audacious. He opened a cabinet of spare parts and carefully selected a small, unassuming metal disc. A harmonic dampener. His grandfather, Samuel Washington, had taught him that sometimes the simplest tools could solve the most complex problems. The lesson echoed now. Engines have souls. "You listen, they speak," Victoria gasped softly. "A disc? That's your solution?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Jamal didn't respond immediately. He studied the engine's vibrations, feeling the resonance through his fingertips. "It's not about brute force or complex programming," he said. "It's about listening. The AI thinks it's compensating for errors that don't exist. We need a translator." He placed the dampener in its designated slot. Hands steady, movements precise. The boardroom watched, tense and silent. Dr. Rodriguez leaned in, her pen poised over her notebook. Every second passed like a lifetime. Could this man, dismissed as a janitor, underestimated, ignored, actually bridge the divide between German precision and Californian software? With a decisive nod, Jamal returned to the ignition. The engine roared to life, its deep mechanical rumble filling the room. This time, however, the sound was different. Smooth, harmonious, controlled. For the first time in 6 weeks, the engine didn't overheat. The pistons fired in perfect synchronization, the valves moved fluidly, and the AI adjusted seamlessly. Green indicators flashed across diagnostic screens. No error codes, no overheating, no system shutdown. The boardroom erupted, not in applause, but in stunned silence. Marcus Brooks stared slack-jawed. "It's stable," he muttered. "It's running perfectly." Dr. Rodriguez's eyes shone with professional admiration. She stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with respect. "This is elegant, efficient, intuitive. I've never seen a solution implemented with such precision and simplicity." Victoria Sterling's smirk had vanished, replaced by a pale, taut mask. Her plan to humiliate Jamal had backfired spectacularly. Instead of spectacle, she witnessed mastery. The janitor, the black man she dismissed, had accomplished what her Ivy League engineers could not. Investors whispered excitedly, noting data on tablets, already calculating the implications. Klaus Miller's stoic gaze cracked slightly. He rose from his chair, walking toward Jamal. "Your methodology, your analysis. This is exceptional," he said, his German-accented English precise and commanding. "We have been evaluating American innovation for months. I've never seen such insight emerge from someone in a position traditionally considered support staff." Jamal remained calm, hands resting lightly on the engine. He didn't need praise. He didn't need recognition. He simply let the engine speak through him, a symphony of pistons, AI, and harmonic balance now perfectly aligned. Victoria's smartphone was still recording. The live stream, intended to capture her triumph, instead captured her professional humiliation and the unstoppable rise of Jamal Washington. Comments flooded in, tech professionals, engineers, and random viewers praising his insight, ingenuity, and determination. Jamal Washington began trending within minutes. The moment had arrived. The underestimated, invisible black janitor had become the catalyst for innovation, proving that talent isn't measured by title, attire, or social standing, but by ability, insight, and perseverance. And the story wasn't over. Jamal's brilliance had just rewritten expectations. His grandfather's lessons, listening, patience, intuition, had been validated on the grandest stage imaginable. The engine hummed with perfection, a low, steady resonance that filled the boardroom like a heartbeat finally aligned. Jamal stepped back, wiping his palms on his worn-out rag. He didn't need applause. The truth was louder than any clapping. His work had spoken for itself. Victoria Sterling's face was pale, every carefully crafted expression of superiority collapsing under the weight of reality. She opened her mouth, searching for a cutting remark, but no words could reverse the awe that had spread across the room. The laughter she had expected from her peers had transformed into stunned silence, punctuated only by soft murmurs of astonishment. Investors who had been skeptical minutes earlier were now leaning forward, their eyes wide, their minds calculating the implications. Klaus Müller, the German engineering director, adjusted his glasses and approached Jamal. "You fixed what my team could not in 6 weeks," he said, voice carrying equal parts respect and disbelief. "Your approach is not just practical, it is visionary." Jamal nodded slightly, humility etched into every line of his face. "It wasn't about vision," he said. "It was about listening, understanding the engine, understanding the software, and respecting the process." Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, her notebook forgotten on the table. "You've done more than fix an engine," she said softly. "You've reminded all of us. Innovation doesn't come from title or prestige. It comes from dedication, patience, and insight. Anyone can see now that brilliance isn't reserved for the elite." The room's atmosphere shifted. People who had doubted him began to see him not as a janitor, not as an outsider, but as a true problem solver, a pioneer in his own right. Jamal's colleagues, the few who had quietly supported him behind the scenes, looked at him with admiration, their pride barely contained. Victoria's smartphone still recorded. The live stream had captured every moment, the disbelief, the transformation, the undeniable triumph of the man she tried to humiliate. Comments poured in. "Unbelievable! This man is a genius! Respect to Jamal Washington!" Within minutes, the video went viral, drawing thousands of shares, retweets, and messages praising his intelligence and resilience. Jamal's story became a symbol, a modern legend in the corporate and tech world. The underestimated, the overlooked, the invisible, rising to undeniable greatness. And yet, even as fame and recognition began to shadow him, Jamal remained grounded, his eyes thoughtful, his mind focused. He looked around the boardroom one last time, meeting Victoria's gaze. She had expected to humiliate, to assert power, to prove dominance. Instead, she had witnessed truth, a truth that could not be erased. "Let this be a lesson," Jamal said, voice steady but powerful. "Talent exists everywhere. Recognition is not always immediate, but integrity, patience, and determination will always reveal the capable, no matter who underestimates them." The room nodded in agreement, even Victoria, though silently. The investors were already discussing new contracts, excited at the prospect of working with someone who could combine intelligence with hands-on skill. Jamal's phone buzzed. His mother, who had waited outside the building in quiet prayer, was calling. He smiled, a private, triumphant smile, knowing that the victory wasn't just professional, it was personal. Every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, every insult he had endured had led to this moment. He stepped outside, sunlight hitting his face, as he walked toward the waiting crowd of journalists and onlookers. Cameras flashed. Questions came rapidly. How did you do it? What advice do you have for young innovators? Will you be leading the project? Jamal answered each with humility, his words inspiring a wave of admiration and hope. And through it all, one message remained clear: perseverance, intelligence, and courage can transform the invisible into the unstoppable. The world had watched, and the underestimated had become unforgettable. Days after the boardroom triumph, Jamal Washington's life had already begun to transform. Headlines celebrated his brilliance, his story shared across social media platforms, news outlets, and engineering forums worldwide. People weren't just amazed, they were inspired. For once, a black man, a janitor, had not only been seen but respected for his skill, intelligence, and courage. Tech vanguard executives scrambled to adapt. Policies were revised, oversight committees reformed, and a culture of recognition slowly replaced the fear and arrogance that had dominated for years. Interns whispered excitedly as Jamal passed by, and engineers who had once ignored him now sought his guidance. Titles no longer mattered. His expertise commanded authority. His promotion was immediate. Jamal stepped into his new role as Senior Engineering Diagnostics Lead, with a salary reflecting his unmatched talent. But more than money or prestige, what mattered most was respect. He was no longer invisible, no longer an afterthought in meetings or a footnote in emails. People listened now carefully to what he had to say. Yet, Jamal never forgot the struggles that had shaped him. He remembered the nights spent cleaning floors, the early mornings at the gas station, the evenings poring over engineering manuals. Every challenge, every moment of invisibility had sharpened him, teaching lessons no classroom could. He carried the wisdom of his grandfather, Samuel Washington, who had long ago instilled the philosophy, engines and people speak if you're willing to listen. Outside the office, Jamal's life began to reflect his professional triumph. He could finally afford to provide for his mother without sacrifice. Her cancer treatments were complete, her home comfortable, her health stable. He invested in her well-being, ensuring she could live the life she had sacrificed so much for him to pursue. The weight of financial worry that had haunted him for years lifted like fog under the morning sun. But the impact went further. Jamal became a symbol. Workshops, conferences, and TED-style talks sought him out to share his story. Young people, especially those overlooked or underestimated, saw in him proof that opportunity is often created through perseverance, not circumstance. Letters arrived from teenagers who had been dismissed for their race, gender, or background saying, "If Jamal can do it, so can I." At Tech Vanguard, his presence altered the company's DNA. Mentorship programs blossomed, and new talent was nurtured regardless of title or educational pedigree. Engineers were reminded that insight could come from anywhere, and leadership recognized the danger of arrogance. Victoria Sterling, once untouchable, now served under advisement, her previous hubris tempered by experience. She approached Jamal privately months later, asking not for forgiveness, but guidance on how to lead inclusively and wisely. His response was simple, yet profound. "Everyone deserves a chance to be seen," he said. "Listen, understand, and give them the opportunity to prove themselves." His humility and leadership inspired a wave of change that extended beyond Tech Vanguard. Other companies began recognizing the importance of merit over appearance, skill over title, and integrity over arrogance. Jamal's influence created a ripple effect. Corporate America had learned that brilliance often comes cloaked in invisibility, and personally, Jamal found balance. His evenings were no longer consumed by multiple jobs, and he began dedicating time to mentoring young engineers, especially those from marginalized communities. Workshops in Detroit, his hometown, became regular as he passed down the same knowledge his grandfather had imparted to him. The cycle of wisdom continued. He stood in his office one quiet evening, looking out at the city lights. The boardroom, where he had once been humiliated, now felt like a distant memory, a test that had proven his resilience. Jamal smiled, a mix of pride and humility. He had transformed not only his life, but the lives of countless others who saw in him a path forward. The lesson was clear. Talent cannot be contained by circumstance. Brilliance cannot be silenced by prejudice, and courage always demands recognition. Months turned into a year, and the story of Jamal Washington was no longer just a viral clip on the internet. It had become a movement. Universities studied his method, leadership courses cited his humility, and engineering journals documented the simplicity and brilliance of his solution. What began as a moment of humiliation in front of 200 executives had become a defining chapter in innovation and equality. At conferences, young students lined up to meet him. Many of them came from underprivileged backgrounds, kids who had been told they weren't good enough or that their dreams were too ambitious. Jamal greeted each one with patience, repeating the same message he had lived. Never let someone else define your limits. You are more than what they see. In Detroit, he funded a scholarship program under his grandfather's name, the Samuel Washington Initiative for Practical Innovation. It focused not on grades or elite schools, but on grit, creativity, and the kind of instinct that Jamal himself had once relied on. Mechanics, coders, garage tinkerers, and kids from community colleges finally had access to opportunities that had always been locked behind closed doors. The corporate world, too, had been shaken. Tech Vanguard's competitors quickly adjusted, shifting away from rigid hierarchies and toward talent-focused ecosystems. Diversity and inclusion programs became more than checkboxes. They became lifelines for real innovation. Jamal's triumph had exposed not just an engine flaw, but a systemic flaw, the arrogance of underestimation. And yet, Jamal never let fame blind him. He still walked with humility, still carried his grandfather's lessons close to his heart. At home, he remained simply a son caring for his mother, a man who loved working with his hands, who found peace in the quiet hum of a well-tuned machine. The roar of engines was his symphony, the grease on his hands a reminder of where he came from. One evening, standing on the stage of a global leadership summit, Jamal faced thousands in the audience and millions more watching online. The lights were bright, but his voice was calm, grounded. "They laughed at me," he began, pausing as silence swept across the room. "They said a janitor couldn't fix a $2 million engine." But in truth, it was never about the engine. It was about respect. About giving people the chance to be seen for who they are, not the titles they carry. The audience erupted in applause, but Jamal lifted his hand gently to quiet them. His final words carried a weight that would be remembered long after the summit ended. We all have engines in our lives, problems that seem impossible, obstacles designed to break us. But if we listen, if we persevere, if we dare to believe in our own worth, we will find a way to make them run. Remember this, the overlooked are often the unstoppable. The applause shook the hall. Tears filled the eyes of many, inspired by the journey of a man who had risen from invisibility to global recognition without losing his humility. That night, social media echoed with his words. Hashtags like "Not Overlooked to Unstoppable" and Jamal Washington Legacy trended worldwide. But more than a trend, it became a philosophy adopted by schools, corporations, and communities. Jamal's legacy was not just about fixing an engine. It was about fixing a system of arrogance and blindness. It was about proving that brilliance belongs to everyone, no matter their uniform, background, or skin color. And so, his story lived on, not as a tale of humiliation, but as an anthem of resilience, courage, and transformation. A reminder that even when mocked, underestimated, or ignored, the true measure of greatness always finds its way to the surface. The janitor who was once invisible had become unforgettable. The man once mocked had become unstoppable. If Jamal's journey moved, If his story of rising from overlooked to unstoppable inspired you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs hope, and tell us about your thoughts in the comments below. And most importantly, subscribe for more stories that prove the overlooked can truly change the world forever.